The darkness before dawn has its own weight. You feel it in your shoulders, stacked behind the ruck, in your legs, still burning from yesterday's movement. In the silence between you and the man 10 meters ahead who hasn't spoken since the last checkpoint and doesn't need to, you've been awake since 0200. The cold has stopped feeling like a temperature and started feeling like a fact of the world. Somewhere behind you, another candidate dropped. Quietly, without announcement, the sound of a ruck hitting ground. Nothing after that sound has become familiar over 4 days. A man deciding something. You don't look back when it happens. Looking back is its own kind of stopping. The next checkpoint is somewhere in the dark. You're still moving. That, for now, is the only thing that matters. Level 1. Specialist E4. Assessment and selection teaches you nothing you can explain to anyone who wasn't here. The cadre don't explain themselves. They issue instructions, set standards, and observe what happens. They're not measuring your strength. Strength is irrelevant against cumulative attrition. 4 days of insufficient sleep and maximum load dismantle the strongest body anyone brings into these mountains. What they're watching is the decision you keep making every hour. Continue or stop. The answer doesn't live in your muscles. It lives somewhere you've never been asked to access before. By day 3, you miss a checkpoint. 200 meters of terrain that looked identical in the dark sent you a degree off your intended line. You don't panic. Panic is another form of stopping. You replot, adjust bearing, and keep moving, knowing the time penalty may cost you everything, knowing the only answer to that is to cover the distance anyway. That is the moment the course teaches something it couldn't teach any other way. You don't know who you are in there yet, but you're starting to find out. Level 2, Corporal E4. Selection ends without ceremony. The final events don't announce themselves as final. You finish, you're assessed, and then someone tells you something brief and factual. You've been selected. You will begin the operator training course. There is no euphoria. There is the hollow satisfaction of a decision validated, and behind it, the quiet understanding that the difficulty hasn't peaked, it's changed shape. The OTC introduces you to a standard of technical precision the rest of the military doesn't practice. Marksmanship, where the margin for error is smaller than anything you've trained to before. Close quarters battle, where the decision lives in the geometry of a room and there's no time between perception and action. In the 3rd week, a hostage rescue drill collapses when you hesitate on a target discrimination call. The trainer stops the scenario cold. He doesn't raise his voice. He replays the moment until you understand exactly where you were and why that half second would have cost everything on a real objective. You're not building skills here. You're building reflexes capable of surviving contact with reality. Level 3, Sergeant E5. Inside the unit, trust is not issued with your gear. The operators around you have years inside this building. Years of operations that didn't make any news, didn't appear in any briefing you were cleared for, didn't get recorded anywhere a civilian would ever find. They move with an economy of presence you recognize as compressed experience. Nothing wasted, nothing performed for any audience. The trust you want here isn't earned through any single performance. It accumulates through consistency, through being the same person in the planning room and on the range and in the debrief. Through unremarkable days where you held the standard when no one was watching it closely. Your first real mission arrives before you feel prepared. The target building has a secondary access point the surveillance never captured. The breach point changes 30 seconds before the team goes in. You adapt. The team adapts. On the objective, the target isn't where the intelligence said he'd be. The decision that follows the one where training either holds or it doesn't happens in a window too narrow for thought. It holds. In the debrief, you learn more about yourself than the objective taught you about the target. Something in your identity closes. Something new opens. Level 4, Staff Sergeant E6. The years turn into a real number, and with them comes a different kind of seeing. Counterterrorism operations are not discrete events. They are sustained pressure applied to networks that restructure around every loss you give them. You learn this concretely on a mission where the high-value target you've been building a case for relocates 12 hours before the planned strike. The intelligence that moved the timeline was solid. The adaptation required replanning, rebriefing, re-rehearsing inside a compressed window that has no room for anxiety, reveals which elements of the team carry process and which carry habit. The new plan holds. The operation succeeds. But what you remember from that night isn't the outcome. It's the speed at which the team absorbed disruption without losing precision. You've made decisions in rooms where the margin between the right call and the wrong one was invisible from outside the room. Familiarity is where errors take up residence. You carry that forward into every brief, every plan you'll ever make. Level 5, Sergeant First Class, E7. The intelligence cycle becomes your world. You're not just executing operations. You're inside the process that precedes them, the collection, the analysis, the targeting discussions that determine which individual gets sequenced into which operational window, more variables, more ways for something to go wrong before the team ever leaves the wire. In a planning session, you flag an inconsistency in the collection package. 2 reporting threads that should corroborate each other don't. The discrepancy is small, the kind that gets rationalized away when an operation has momentum behind it. You stop the brief. The room doesn't thank you for it. 3 days later, when updated intelligence confirms the location assumption was wrong, no one says anything about that either. The most important calls don't always get acknowledged. You make them anyway. That's the job. The younger operators are watching you in that room now. Not what you say, what you notice. You are the standard they're forming, and no one asked you about that, and you are it anyway. Level 6, Master Sergeant E8. There's a specific gravity to being the most experienced person in a room where decisions are being made with imperfect information. The junior operators look to you. Not because of rank is a formality underneath a meritocracy that runs by its own internal logic. They look to you because you've been in situations where the reasonable decision produced an outcome that couldn't be undone, and you're still here, and you've incorporated that into how you think. You lost a man on an operation 4 years ago. The plan was sound. The intelligence was current. A timing element had less margin than you'd calculated, and he was in the gap when it closed. The inquiry found no negligence. You've conducted your own inquiry every day since. The weight of a loss that lives on the edge of a call you made is different from any other grief. It doesn't leave. You've stopped wanting it to. You need it to stay useful, to live in the judgment that calculates margins, builds in slack, and refuses to let certainty arrive before the information earns it. You carry it into every planning session. Results explain themselves. The men around you know that. Level 7, First Sergeant E8. Accountability at this level is structural. You are responsible for readiness, not the appearance of readiness, the actual condition of people who will be asked to perform something irreversible under conditions that don't care about their preparation. The difference between managing a standard and holding one is the difference between paperwork and consequence. 6 weeks before deployment, a training assessment reveals a performance gap in a junior operator under degraded communications. The kind of gap that doesn't show in standard metrics, only in the scenario that exposed it. You pull him from the rotation. It costs the team a slot they needed. It costs him a deployment he'd been working toward for 2 years. He understands, eventually. You don't wait for his understanding before making the decision. You find gaps before they become consequences. That's always been the job. Level 8, Sergeant Major E, 9. The pipeline that produces the next generation of Delta Force operators runs through the decisions you're making right now. Selection standards, training rigor, the OTC standard. What gets through the process and what doesn't? These aren't administrative questions. They are the unit's investment in its own future capability, and you are standing between the standard that built this organization and the erosion that begins the moment convenience gets chosen over quality. A proposal arrives to adjust one element of the selection course. The reasoning looks sound on paper. You sit with it for a week. You think about adjustments you've watched other units make, each one defensible in isolation, the cumulative result of all of them visible from the outside in, what those units became. You decline the proposal. You put your name on the documentation. The standard holds. It holds because someone made a decision. That someone is you. Level 9. Command Sergeant Major, E9. The unit carries more weight now than it did when you arrived. Not more personnel, more history, more institutional memory, more understanding of what this organization is capable of at its best, what the cost of sustaining that looks like, and what is lost when the standard drifts. You are the living record of decades inside an organization built to do what no other unit can do, in conditions where failure is not a setback. It is a permanent outcome for real people. Commanders rotate through. The mission set evolves. Threats change geography. Technology advances. What doesn't change is the fundamental character of this unit, because the people responsible for that character treat its preservation as the most important work they do. You are still one of those people. That responsibility doesn't transfer. It stays with you until you're no longer here to carry it. It is early morning. The same mountains. Not the same mountains exactly. You're looking at them from higher ground now, from the side of a man whose elevation was earned through years rather than miles. The darkness before dawn still holds its weight. It always will. The cold is still the cold. The silence still costs something. Somewhere below where you stand, candidates are moving through the navigation course, alone with their decisions. One of them has probably just missed a checkpoint in the dark, standing on a hillside recalculating, adding time to a clock that has no margin left, deciding what to do next. Most of them will not be here in 2 weeks. The ones who remain won't celebrate. They'll be told one fact, and they'll sleep, and they'll begin again at a harder level. Selection doesn't separate the strong from the weak. It separates the ones who stopped from the ones who didn't. You didn't stop. Decades later, you're standing on a mountain, watching the next generation face the same question in the dark. The answer has never changed. It never will.